Good morning, Mosaics. To this morning, what I want to do is try to wrap up the forgiveness series. We've been sitting on this for a while, and I know that we've looked at several different aspects of the forgiveness series, but at the same time, I wish I could dive deeper into this. I really do, because I think forgiveness is, as I stated at the very beginning, something that is that constant weight on our shoulders. It's that constant chain that is around our ankles, and it is the one thing that I think so many times steals the most joy out of our lives and imprisons us more than anything. I've talked a little bit about, I think that one of the reasons that it does that is we have this misunderstanding of what forgiveness is. Through the series, and if you haven't looked at this series, you can go ahead and take a look at our YouTube channel. We've got the different videos on the forgiveness series on there. But throughout the series, I shared my story, and I'm going to kind of wrap up with that also. But we talked about forgiving ourselves. We talked about the power, and we talked about the importance of forgiveness. Some of the things I want to address as we begin to close up and wrap up this series of forgiveness is what forgiveness is and what forgiveness is not. When you take a look in the Bible, I think so many times, at least I know that when I was growing up, I was taught that forgiveness is forgetting or forgiving and forgetting. I heard that over and over and over. And I understand the principle of where a lot of pastors, a lot of speakers get that from. And that comes from, as if you are a Christian, if you are a person of the Christian faith, the Bible talks about how we're supposed to be, as Christians, Christ-like. And the Bible talks about how when Christ forgives us, he places our sins and our past as far as the east is from the west. And so in that concept, we get the idea that God has forgotten. He's not only forgiven us of our sins, he's forgotten our sins. And if that's the case, then when we forgive, we are to also forget. But we don't see that teaching in the Bible. And that became a very hard obstacle when it came to me learning to forgive. Because I'll tell you honestly, I can never forget what that individual did to me. When I was younger, and the man who molested me, I will never be able to forget that. To this day, it is very vivid in my mind, every aspect of that incident, the incidences, several of them. And so when I began to think about it, I was like, well, if forgiving comes with forgetting, then there's absolutely no way that I'll ever be able to forgive. Then I began to look deeper in the Bible, and also in the experience of forgiving, and taking a look at the attitude and the spirit of forgiving. And I found out and discovered that forgiving is not necessarily forgetting. Now, I think that we can take a look, and I think maybe the concept of forgetting is there, but not in the aspect of, well, I'll never remember it. And let me explain. First and foremost, I think we've talked about it before, but forgiving is so important because it is you letting go. And I'm going to get into a little more of what forgiveness is in a minute after I talk about what forgiveness is not. But I think when it comes to forgetting and the idea of forgiving and forgetting, it is the idea of, I will not waste any more time on this. Will the memory be there? Absolutely. Could the pain be there? Absolutely. Until you learn to move past that pain. That's a part of a whole nother process that is not part of forgiveness. It is the part of the grieving process. It's part of the psychological aspect of how to move past something and how to learn. And there are stages of that. And those stages are necessary in our lives. And I think if we try to rush those stages, if we try to rush past the pain and just say, okay, I forgive and I forget, and I don't have the pain, then we mute or stunt our emotional and spiritual growth. So I think it's important to understand that when I say, if you want to go with the idea of forgiving and forgetting, then forgetting is simply this. It's an act, just like forgiving. is a saying, I won't waste any more time on this. I'm just going to forget it. Yes, will it be there if I need to talk about it? Absolutely. Will I remember it? Most likely. But I'm not going to spend any more time focused on it. Focused on that moment. I may focus on different aspects as I move forward from that moment. You see, that is why forgiveness is so important. If you do not forgive, if I chose not to forgive the individual, and see, a lot of times, another thing that forgiveness is not necessarily for that other person. That other person may, depending on how grievous the situation is, that person may benefit from your forgiveness. But the forgiveness is not necessarily meant to be a benefit for them. It is meant to be a freedom for you. I think so many times we get wrapped up in that, we get caught up in that, and we get that aspect, well, if I forgive this person, that makes what they did okay. No, it doesn't. What it says is, to you, that person, to life, is I am no longer going to be held prisoner of this event. For several years, I struggled with that when it came to the point of being molested, also the point of being bullied. I was bullied a large portion of my life by numerous individuals that I had to learn to forgive. I had elements of situations growing up, as we all do, that I had to have to spend time forgiving individuals of things that they had done to me, whether they realized it or not, and how it affected me. And what I kind of struggled with was, well, I don't want to forgive them because what they did to me was not okay. And if I forgive them, I feel like I'm letting them off the hook. Well, no, in all reality, by not forgiving them, you're keeping yourself on the hook. I want you to imagine an old dungeon with me, an old, dirty, medieval dungeon that's got water dripping down and it's musty smelling and there's rats running around the floor. And I want you to imagine you are hung by your wrist, barely being able to touch the floor, in shackles, and you're hanging there. And I want you to imagine that your shackles are the events that have happened in your life that you haven't forgiven someone for. I am an individual who walks into this prison and I see you hanging there and I go, wait a minute, why are you here? And you go, look, I'm shackled. Look what has happened to me. And and sometimes we call the victim's card. And I'm not saying that negatively, because if something has drastically happened to you, or if someone has done something to you, then you are a victim. But I think where that comes into play, the victim's card, is when we begin to live that victim life. You're stronger than that. And so what I do is I walk in, I say, why are you hanging there? And you go, look what has happened to me. I cannot move. I'm trapped. And I go, but they're just hooks. You can unhook yourself and you can move on. Well, no, I don't want to do that because the person who put me there then gets away with what they did. I'm unjustly put here. And if I'm not here, then no one will know that they unjustly put me here. And I look at you and I go, but don't you think that you can be more of a difference by taking those chains off the hooks that you're on, leave your chains here, and go out and tell people what happened? And you're sitting there, no, don't take my chains off. No, that is what forgiveness or unforgiving does. That moment in your life shackled you for whatever reason. I'm not here to tell you whether it should or whether it shouldn't have, because each of us deal with things differently in our lives. But that moment shackled you. And I'm here to tell you that you can take those shackles off the wall. You can leave those shackles behind. Does it change the fact that the incident happened? No. Does it change the fact that you were hurt and you're going to have to face that situation? Absolutely not. And does it change the fact, does it take the person, whoever it is that you have to forgive, does it take them off the hook? No. What it does is say, No longer am I going to be held a prisoner by the event. Every time I chose not to forgive the man who molested me, every day that I relived that moment, and every day I refused to let, because forgiveness is a conscious choice. Every time I refused to let him or to forgive him, that was another day he won. Because you see, he went on with his life after that day. He went on with his life. He had a family. Things happened in his life. I'm pretty sure he probably never ever thought about me on a daily basis. But there were many times I thought of him. Forgiveness is a conscious step of saying, no longer will I let you be in control. No longer will I let this event be in control. I today forgive. I'm not saying it was okay. I'm not saying I was at fault. I am not saying that justice shouldn't be served, or what I am saying is I will no longer be shackled. And in that, it becomes a process, because forgiveness doesn't happen overnight. I didn't just wake up one morning and say, well, I forgive this guy, and everything was cool. There were times I would feel that anger rising again, and I have to remind myself, and I would have to say it. I would look in the mirror and say, I would mention his name, and I would say, I forgive you. You no longer own me. This moment no longer defines me. Your moment of whatever it is in your life doesn't define you unless you choose to allow it to define you. And by choosing not to forgive, you are giving that moment, that event, and that person the authority to define you. Let it go. Let it go. You will find freedom, great freedom in it. Will it happen overnight? Absolutely not. Is it a process? It's one that you will have to do every day. And now I can sit here and say I'm free of it. I am able to talk about it without crying. I'm able to talk about it without breaking down. I'm able to talk about it without having a rage. And I will tell you, honestly, 20, maybe 20 something years later, if I saw that man face to face, I would be able to actually now sit down with him. I would be able to look at him and say, what you did to me was wrong, but I forgive you. Doesn't mean I'm going to have a relationship with you. Doesn't mean we get to pick up anything and be buddies, but I would be able to sit in front of him and say, I forgive you. Because in that, you are empowered. Forgiveness gives you power. Unforgiveness gives them, and that moment, power. Mosaics, thank you so much for being a part of Shattered Mosaic. Thank you so much for being a part of this forgiveness series. If we can help you in any way, please let us know. And I look forward as we continue on with a new series. Stay motivated, stay purposeful, stay valuable. Until next time, Mosaics, we'll talk to you later.